Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel. And today we're going to be doing my first wrap up of 2026. And I'm going to be letting you know about the 42 books that I've read so far this year. This is actually the biggest wrap up that I've ever had on my channel. Like, I've never had a video where I talk about 42 books in one video. So I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. And if you were wondering, I've had so many books that I've DNF'd already this year. I've had about 15 DNFs. I'll put the list on the screen if you wanted to see, like, at a glance all the books that I've DNF'd so far this year. And some of these were like hard DNFs and some of these were like, oh, I'm not sure, maybe I'll come back to this eventually kind of DNFs. But what can I say? When you know the book's not for you, you just know. And before we do jump into all the books, I just wanted to take a minute to thank today's video sponsor, which is Book of the Month. I always love anytime that I get the chance to work with Book of the Month because I've been a customer of Book of the Month for nearly a decade now, which is crazy to say, but I've been getting books from Book of the Month since 2017. I have an entire bookshelf dedicated to the Book of the Month books that I've collected over the years. And if you've never heard of Book of the Month, then let me tell you about them. Book of the Month's mission is to bring the best new fiction forward. Their vision is to inspire and shape a more curious and thoughtful culture. So how it works is that every month they'll have 5 to 7 book selections to choose from, and all of the books featured are not only new release books, but sometimes they will have early releases where you can't get the book anywhere else. And almost always they have some of my most anticipated books of the year as monthly selections, but at the same time I'm always discovering new books and new authors that I've never heard of before, and I think that's equally great because there's nothing better than finding a new book that you love that you never would have heard of otherwise. I love that Book of the Month is always including books in so many different genres. Every single month there are hundreds of books getting published, and I think it can be really overwhelming trying to keep track of all of the new releases, and that's why it's so great that Book of the Month does the work for you. Plus they offer the best prices on new hardcover fiction books. They also have free shipping and a loyalty rewards program, and for a limited time you can join Book of the Month and get your first book for just $9.99 plus a free gift with the code LUCKY. I know for my free gift I had to get one of their hats because look at how cute this is. On this hat it says born to read books, forced to read emails. I love the details with the stitching on the side. I don't even wear baseball caps super often, but the ones that I wear the most are from Book of the Month because these are so cute, and they have tons of other free gifts to choose from. And this month I ended up picking 2 different selections that I'm so excited about. One of them is this one called How to Write a Love Story by Catherine Walsh, because once again, if they have a romance, I'm very likely to pick it up. This is a romance that especially intrigues me because it follows writers, and I'm always talking about how I love reading books that follow writers. And then I also ended up adding on this romance called And Now Back to You by B.K. Borison, because I read First Time Caller last year and I was a really big fan of that one. And this is the newest book from this author, and this romance sounds like it's gonna be so good. So these are the 2 that I ended up going with for the month of March, but they had so many exciting selections. Like, one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, The Story Might Save Your Life, was a selection for the month of March. So be sure to check out my link down below and get your first book for just $9.99 when you use the code LUCKY. And thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. I also just wanted to mention that in the last 2 months, I've been making so many different exclusive videos on my Patreon. In the month of January, I posted another monthly vlog that included a lot of different things that I was going through in the month of January, and it also included my birthday. And then also in January, I ended up posting this book troop reflections video that was kind of talking about like the last 5 years of the book club. And then in the month of February, I also posted 2 exclusive videos. One of them was where the library would control my TBR using this service called Surprise Selection. And this is actually a video that I had in the works for almost 2 years. Since March 2024, I've been trying to make this video. So it was really great to finally be able to complete this video. And then I also ended up posting a spoiler-filled vlog for My Husband's Wife by Alice Feeney to my Patreon in February. And I did a day in the life style reading vlog where I read this one and I talked all about it. And I thought I would mention that in the month of March, I'm planning to do a Patreon exclusive video where I kind of do like a sleepover style vlog. And I'm going to be reading the book Dollface by Lindy Ryan in that vlog. This is one that I've been so curious to read because it's being described as Barbie meets Scream. And so I'm so curious to check out this new horror book. And I thought it would be fun to include this in like a sleepover style vlog. Like, I'm gonna be wearing pajamas and like lighting candles, and it's gonna be really cute and cozy. So if you want to see the sleepover vlog or any of the videos that I've been working on these past few months, I will have the link for my Patreon down below. But now, without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into all the books that I've read so far this year. As usual, I'm gonna be starting with the lowest rated that I had and then working my way up to the highest rated books that I've had so far this year. So starting with my lowest rated book that I've had so far this year, it has to be this thriller called Run Unread. This is a thriller that's been on my TBR for such a long time, and I thought it would be really fun because I was hearing it being described as one of those like high stakes kind of thrillers because it's about these girls that are on the road, they see this truck pulling up behind them, it's kind of like this non-stop action thing of them getting chased and they don't know why. But this book just really didn't work for me for a number of reasons, and I think the biggest reason was because it was so repetitive, but also I could not care less about any of the characters in this book, especially the the main character, I feel like she was a little bit of a douchebag. And then another book that I gave 2 stars is The Midnight Knock by John Fram. I have given John Fram 5 stars in the past, and I always am so excited to check out his new books, but this one just really didn't work for me, and it sucks because I do think this is the kind of book where like it had so much potential. Not only did I feel like so confused while I was reading this book, but I feel like this was another book where like it was starting to get so repetitive in the second half of this book. Another 2-star thriller that I've read recently is Pinky Swear by Danielle Girard. It's about this woman who like shows up on this other woman's doorstep, and like they used to know each other in high school. They used to be best friends, but they've drifted apart. And then they end up becoming really close friends again, and like so close that Mara offers to become this woman's surrogate. And then it's about how she goes missing a few days before the baby is due. I just didn't really connect with the characters in this book, and I also think the story was really bogged down by a lot of flashback scenes that I just could not care less about. And then a romance book that I gave 2 stars to that I'm devastated about this one. It's In Your Dreams by Sarah Adams. I just read another book recently by Sarah Adams in December, and I really enjoyed it, so I was really excited to read this new book from her. And this romance is about this woman named Madison who's a chef, and at the time she's living in New York City, but she's going to be coming back home to her small town in Rome, Kentucky. And then it's a romance between her and this guy named James, who is her brother's best friend. And this didn't work for me for a number of reasons, but it was mainly because this girl Madison, I felt like she was so immature, and I also just didn't really understand the chemistry between them. Like it only felt physical, it only felt like lust, but we keep hearing over and over again that James has like been in love with Madison for his entire life, but we never really get to see why. I don't know, I just really didn't connect with their chemistry at all. Like I felt nothing for these characters, and I just really didn't care about this romance. Like I probably should have DNF'd it. I also ended up giving 2.5 stars to Midnight Timetable by Bora Chung, and this is one that I was so excited about because I loved Cursed Bunny by this author, and I thought this would be another huge win for me because this one's also another short story collection. And this one had so much potential too, because in this story all of the short stories revolve around this place that's like an institution. It says all of these stories are set in a mysterious research center that houses cursed objects. But I think out of the 7 or 8 short stories in this collection, I only really enjoyed like maybe 1 or 2, and the rest of them were so forgettable. And then another book that I unfortunately only gave 2.5 stars to was Cherish Farah. This is actually the book that I ended up reading for that library video that I did for my Patreon. This was one of the ones that the library selected for me to read, and I was actually really interested in reading this one because it's a young adult horror novel that I've heard a lot about over the years. I just never got around to reading it, and this is one that I really thought could be my thing because I am a really big fan of social horror novels, and I also do love horror novels that kind of explore like toxic friendships between females, because in this story we're following these 2 young girls named Cherish and Farah, and they're the only 2 black girls in this very white community. And while I did appreciate some of the commentary in this book, I just thought this book was so slow paced, and I think the second half of this book especially just really lost me, like to the point where it was even hard for me to tell what was going on in the plot, and I just really didn't care for the ending either. And then I also gave 2.5 stars to I Have Some Questions for You. This is a book that I read for my Backlist Bonanza video, and this book is technically like a mystery thriller, but I would describe it as being a lot more of like a literary mystery because this book is very, very slow paced, and honestly like not a lot really happens in this book. And I think the reason why I ended up rating this one pretty low is because I didn't really care about any of the characters in this book, and I just genuinely feel like this author was trying to do a little bit too much. Like we were trying to have so many different conversations in this book, and it just kind of felt a little bit all over the place in tone and in plot, and it also just felt a little bit too long. Like I don't think there was any reason this book needed to be over 430 pages. This next section of books, these were all the books that I thought were okay, but they weren't great. It was a lot of my 3-star reads that I had. Starting with Atomic Hearts, this is another one that I read for that Backlist Bonanza video. This one is a literary fiction novel where we're following this young 16-year-old girl, and we're kind of reading about the summer that ended up changing her life. And then this story is about how she ends up moving from this small town in Michigan to this small town in South Dakota. And this story is really about like her and her family and her friendships and how some of her family members have dealt with addiction. And I thought this one was just okay. I just didn't really connect with the characters very much, and I especially lost interest in the story after she moved away. But I think I've read a lot of books that deal with similar themes to this one that I've enjoyed a lot more, like Yerba Buena and The Bright Years are 2 books that come to mind. Another book that was kind of devastating to only give 3 stars was The Future Saints by Ashley Winstead. Ashley Winstead is an author that I so desperately want to love her books more than I do. I thought this one would be right up my alley too, and like on paper this sounds like my perfect kind of a book. because in this story we're following this band. They're all a bunch of songwriters, and there's a really good sister relationship being explored in this book between the lead singer of the group, Hannah, and her sister Ginny. It just seems like this should have been the perfect book for me, and that's why I'm so sad that I'm only giving this 3 stars. Like, it was just fine. I think there was some kind of disconnect between me and the characters. Like, I just didn't really care about them as much as I was hoping I would. And it also just got to the point where like the second half of this book was so predictable, and like it hits all of the emotional beats that you're expecting it to hit, but I just didn't really feel much for these characters. And then I also gave 3 stars to Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy, and this book is kind of a tough book to rate because I do see what Jeanette McCurdy was trying to do with this book, but I just don't know if this was like the book for me, and I don't really know if her message really landed in the way that she was going for. I think this is another situation where like I would compare this book to My Dark Vanessa, like something else that I've read that I enjoyed a little bit more than this one, because this is a very controversial book about this young like underage girl who is actively sexually pursuing her teacher, and you're reading from the young girl's perspective the entire time, and I feel like there's a lot of scenes in this book that only feel like they were added for shock value, but at the end of the day I feel like I expected to take away so much more from this story, and by the ending I was just like, oh, like, it's over. I also only gave 3 stars to Death of the Author, and this one is a sci-fi book that I've been wanting to read for so long. And this book is actually really fascinating because I would say it's equal parts literary fiction and sci-fi, because we're following this woman who's an author, and this character that we're following in this book was really interesting because she's from Nigeria, she has disabilities, and not only is she a writer and she's writing sci-fi for like the first time in her life, but she also has this kind of like complicated relationship with her family that's getting explored throughout the book as well. And so you are getting a lot of chapters that are about her life and like what she's going through, and then in between those chapters you're reading about her sci-fi book. The thing that really surprised me about this book is that I actually ended up enjoying the chapters about her life so much more than I enjoyed the chapters of her sci-fi book, even though I picked up this book because it was sci-fi. But I really liked reading about her character specifically, and like her family dynamics were really interesting, but then the book would start to lose me actually when I would read those sci-fi chapters, and especially towards the end, the sci-fi just got so heavy for me at the end that I couldn't even really follow what was happening. Another 3 star that I had was The Burial Tide by Neil Sharpson. This is one that I was really looking forward to because I loved Knock Knock Open Wide by this author. And this is a horror book that had some of the best atmosphere that I've read all year long, because this entire story is taking place on this island off the coast of Ireland, and the vibes of this island were just so eerie and so weird, I was eating it up. And then the main premise of this book is how we have this woman who wakes up with no memory of who she is, and she's kind of like going through the town, meeting all these people, trying to learn her story. And I think my biggest issue with this book was that there were way too many characters. I was getting so confused on like who is who. Then also like I just don't think the ending of this book was very satisfying, and I just didn't love this one nearly as much as I've loved the other book from this author. But I do think that this book had some of the most intense body horror that I've read in a long time. Like, it was causing such a reaction from me, so at least it was very memorable for those reasons. I also ended up giving 3 stars to Junie, which this one is a historical fiction book that also kind of deals with some magical realism elements. And because this book is historical fiction and it's like taking place before the Civil War, it was definitely a little bit outside of my comfort zone, because I tend to have the same complaint with a lot of historical fiction, and that's that I find it to be a little bit slow paced. And I feel like this book was no different. Like, this was very, very, very slow paced. And I think I really struggled to connect with some of the characters in this book, like outside of Junie. Like, I thought Junie herself was a really great and really interesting character to follow, but otherwise I didn't really connect to any of the other characters. And there was also a romance introduced in this book that I wanted to care so much more about. I also think the magical realism elements of this book were like really cool, but they just never went anywhere interesting for me. So this one sadly only ended up being a 3 stars for me, even though this is one of my favorite book covers of the year. Like, I'm obsessed with this. I also only ended up giving 3 stars to Cherry Baby by Rainbow Rowell. This one was an ARC that I had on my Kindle, and this one's actually going to be publishing in April. But oh my god, this was one of my most anticipated books of the entire year because I love Rainbow Rowell. And it really sucks that I only gave this 3 stars because at the beginning of this book, I was so convinced this was going to be like a new favorite of mine. Like, it had all of the 5-star energy. And the beginning of this book was really great, and it was really comforting to me in the way that all of Rainbow Rowell's books are. And I love that we're following this character named Cherry as she's kind of going through this separation from her husband Tom. This book was just going so well until it really, really lost me in the second half, because this book actually went in a direction that I wasn't expecting it to go, and it just really wasn't the direction I was hoping the story would go. So I was kind of like taken off guard by that. And then also in the second half, Cherry's character just started to really irritate me. So I only gave this one 3 stars, and I'm so sad about it. Another 3 star that I had was The Body by Bethany C. Morrow, and this was actually the first book that I read from this author, and I read Cherish Farah after this one, and this is one that I enjoyed quite a bit more than Cherish Farah. And this story is being described as a supernatural horror, and it's definitely more of a like religious kind of horror as well. We're following this woman named Mavis, and right at the start of this book she gets into this really bad car accident, and then it's about how her and her husband are starting to believe that maybe these things are not accidents that are happening to them. I thought this book started off really promising and I was really invested in the beginning of the story, but then it really started to lose me because in the second half it started to feel like it was more about like her marital drama, like a lot of drama with her husband that I just didn't necessarily care about. And I also do struggle with religious horror sometimes, even though I do tend to pick it up still, but I personally thought the ending of this book was just so unsatisfying and I just wanted a little bit more. Then I also gave 3 stars to the new Colleen Hoover book, Woman Down. This story is about a woman who is an author and she has a book that gets adapted into a movie and then she ends up getting canceled shortly after that. And she goes away to this cabin to start working on her new book, and then she meets this guy who's a detective and she kind of starts to use him as her muse for her writing. And so in this book we get this weird kind of cross between it being like a thriller and a romance. I thought this book was just fine and it ended up being a little bit more predictable than I was hoping. And then I also ended up giving 3 stars to The Bone Queen by Will Schindler. And this is another book that it sucks that I only gave this 3 stars because this book had all of the potential to be so good. Because in this story we're following this single mother named Jenna, and her young teenage daughter Chloe just disappears one day, and she has reason to believe that her daughter Chloe went to this weird island, and on this island there's this local legend about this woman called the Bone Queen, and they think that she's responsible for all of the missing people on the island in the last couple of years. Oh, this book had all of the potential. Like, I loved the atmosphere of this island. I loved the eerie idea of the Bone Queen. Like, it was so creepy and weird, and I loved learning about the lore. And something that I will say about this book that was so great is that the chapters are so short, and the book in general is pretty short. Like, it was really easy to fly through this whole thing in one afternoon, but I just wanted so much more out of this because I didn't really care about the characters in the book very much, and I also thought the ending was just so like meh. I still stand by the fact that this would have been better as an episode of Supernatural. So it was only 3 stars for me, but I will definitely be reading more from this author in the future because I did really like the writing in this. And then I also only gave 3 stars to Her Last Breath by Taylor Adams. Oof, this one hurts me too. This was one of my most anticipated thrillers of this year because I have loved so many thrillers from this author, and this one is one that I was especially excited about because it involves these 2 female friends and they both go into this cave. They go on this caving expedition, and then there's this guy that's kind of like lingering around, kind of like following them, offering to help them, and he's kind of like acting weird and shady. And this story is like a really intense one that takes place in the span of like 24 hours as you're following these 2 friends as they're going into the cave, and then you're also getting a perspective that's like 24 hours later when you're reading about this character Tess when she's in the hospital after and she's explaining to the detective what ended up happening. So this book was really intense, and I think Taylor Adams, what he does best is writing like suspense and action. This book was so claustrophobic. Oh my gosh, like if you have any kind of fear of caves, like I definitely do, oh man, like some of the scenes were so tough. But the reason why this one only ended up being 3 stars for me is because I thought the second half of this book, oh my gosh, it was so predictable. Like once I figured out what was going on, it was like I was just waiting for the twist to drop. And then I also think it got so repetitive with the nicknames. I don't know how many times I had to read baby girl on the page, and then also like sesame seed, like all these different little nicknames. I was so over it by the end of the book. Like it was really irritating me. So because it ended up being so predictable for me, I only ended up giving it 3 stars, but a lot of people really seem to be loving this one, so take my review with a grain of salt. Alright, now jumping into the section of books that I really enjoyed. These were most of the books that I gave around like 3.5 stars or 4 stars. So starting with some of my 3.5 stars, I have Colored Television. This one is a literary fiction book that really worked for me, I think, because we're following this woman who's a writer. And I love books that follow writers, but I think this one especially worked for me because not only is she writing books, but in this book she kind of explores, you know, like writing television. And I think this book was really interesting because our main character is biracial and her husband is also biracial. And I feel like there's a lot of different commentary about that in this book and like what it's like to work in Hollywood. This book could also be described as like a dark comedy, and a lot of the elements in this book really reminded me of the movie American Fiction. So I think if you like that style of satire, I really think you would enjoy this too. I also ended up reading the book James, and this is another one that's been on my radar for a little while, and I actually ended up reading this book because it was one of BookTube's like best books of 2025. And I can definitely see why, even though this book is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, you know, because this one's a historical fiction and it's also a retelling of a classic classic. It's a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which I was completely unfamiliar with. So I kind of went into this book not really knowing too much, but I thought this book was so well written. It really impressed me. And I thought even though this book is about really like heavy and like dark subject matter, it was actually really lighthearted and very satirical for the most part. There was even a little bit of like a plot twist at the end of this book that I personally didn't see coming that I was really surprised by. I also gave 3.5 stars to The Next Best Fling by Gabriela Gamez. This is one that I ended up checking out from my library, and this book also follows this woman who's a librarian named Marcella, and she has been secretly in love with her best friend Ben for like years and years and years. And at the start of this book, Ben is getting engaged to this woman named Alice. So because they got engaged, Ben's brother Theo, who's an NFL player, he's gonna be coming back home, and Marcella finds out at the start of this book that Theo is like really in love with this girl Alice that his brother just got engaged to. And so she's able to like stop Theo from like interfering with their engagement party and like confessing his love to her. And in the meantime, they start to catch feelings for each other and they decide to start fake dating each other to try and get over them. Oh my gosh, this book was so messy and it was so fun. I love that this was kind of like a love triangle, but it was almost like 4 people were involved. I just really love the way that this author writes her romance books for the most part. This is the second book that I've read from this author this year and I just really enjoyed it. The only reason why I gave this one 3.5 stars instead of a higher rating is because the ending of this book, I think Marcella was like really rubbing me the wrong way with how she was treating this guy Theo. Like I honestly felt like she was treating him poorly and it was really starting to bother me. Otherwise, this was a really fun romance that I would highly recommend, especially if you love romances that are really messy. Another romance that I really enjoyed was Overdue by Stephanie Perkins, and this is another romance that follows a librarian. I was reading a lot of books like back to back to back that had librarians for some reason. What I loved about this one is that we're following this character named Ingrid, and she's 29 years old and she's been with this guy for like 11 years. And they're kind of reaching that point where they're like, okay, well, are we gonna get married or are we gonna like break up and find other people, because they've been together 11 years. They don't know what the future has in store for them. And so this book is about how they decide to take a month apart and they decide to start seeing some other people. And I really adored this book. I love the writing in it so much. Like the writing was very comforting to me in the same way that like Rainbow Rowell's books are very comforting to me. I loved following Ingrid as a character. And I actually thought it was really fun how we would follow her as she's like trying to date again after a decade of being in a relationship with somebody and how difficult that was for her. I think the only reason why this one only ended up being around a 3.5 stars for me is because it just felt a little bit long. This book is over 400 pages and I just don't really think it needed to be that long. But otherwise, I thought this was really wholesome and really sweet, and I definitely want to read more adult books from Stephanie Perkins. I also ended up reading the Amazon Prime short story that's called Time Will Tell by Hannah Bonham Young. And this is one that I did enjoy, but I only ended up giving it 3.5 stars because I kind of feel like once the story was over, like that's when the romance was like really starting for me. I do sometimes struggle with like these short, romance novellas because sometimes I feel like they're never long enough, and this one's only like 90 pages. We're just following these two characters as they're like emailing back and forth because they find out that their grandmas had this like secret romance together, and like the setup was super cute and I was really liking both of the characters, but I kind of feel like it was over before it even started. But I did have another Amazon short story that I enjoyed even more than this one that you'll hear about later. I also gave 4 stars to the book Woodworking. This is another one that really surprised me, and this one is a literary fiction book, and we're following these two characters who are trans. One of them is a student at this school and then the other one is a teacher, and Erica is the teacher's perspective in this book, and her perspective was really interesting because she's not out yet as trans, whereas Abigail, the teenager that we're following in this book, she is out as trans. And Abigail's perspective was my favorite thing. Like she was just so funny. She added so much comedy to this book and I just really enjoyed her character, and I actually really loved the complicated kind of relationship that these two have. I just really love the kind of like supportive friendship and bond that these two have throughout the book, and I feel like this book had so much amazing commentary just on the trans experience in general, and I just loved this one so much more than I thought I was going to, and I would highly recommend. I also ended up giving 4 stars to Superfan. In this story, we're following this young girl named Minnie, and she's a freshman in college, and she starts to get obsessed with this boy group that's called Hourglass. They're not a K-pop group, but they're kind of like inspired by K-pop. But what I found really interesting about this book is that you're not only following from Minnie's perspective, you also get the perspective of this guy Eason, and he's part of the boy group. And I think this book does such an incredible job of kind of showing like the realities of what it's like to be in a group like this versus like the perception of like what the fans are seeing. I really connected with Minnie's perspective in this book a lot, and I loved so much of her commentary about like what it's like to be a fangirl. And I think if you've ever gotten into a K-pop group or like any boy band or any big group ever, I think you're really gonna connect with some of the things that she has to say about like what it's like to be a fangirl. But I think this book had so much great commentary on like fan culture in general and like how toxic it can be sometimes. But I also love the way that this book had commentary about like women specifically when it comes to like fandom and how people always want to like mock or shame things that women love. There was just so much great commentary commentary in this that I loved so much. I also had a handful of thrillers that I ended up giving 4 stars to, like this book, You'll Never Know. This book is so good and so twisty. In this story, we're just following this guy who is on a hike with his wife, and at the start of the hike, she tells him that she's pregnant, and they have this moment of celebration before this white van pulls up, and then they abduct his wife and take her. The whole opening chapter of this book is like him frantically trying to figure out what happened to his wife, and this book was just a non-stop action thrill ride. Like, oh my god, it was so intense. There were so many twists, and that's exactly what I'm looking for these days in a thriller. Like, it was just so entertaining. I could not pull my eyes away from the page. Another thriller that I really enjoyed is this one called Love Mom, but we're following this woman named Mackenzie, and she's actually the daughter of this woman who's a very successful writer. And at the start of this book, her mother actually passes away under mysterious circumstances. And then the day after the memorial service, Mackenzie ends up getting this letter that says, "From your #1 fan, XOXO," and she realizes that the pages inside the envelope are from her mom's diary, and she's trying to figure out like who could be sending her these pages and why are they sending her pages from her mom's diary. Oh my gosh, this one was crazy. I think this book takes about like 100 pages for it to really pick up, but then by the time we were in part 2, oh my god, I was tearing through the pages. I was like, what do you mean? And this book just had so many fun little twisty moments that I wasn't expecting. Another thriller that I really enjoyed is Good Intentions, and this one I would actually describe more as being like a literary thriller, because this one definitely leans more literary because it's more of like a character study than anything. We're following this woman named Katie, and she has this very close relationship with her sister, and right at the start of this book, her sister, who's also her identical twin, she ends up dying, and while she's in the hospital dealing with the death of her sister, she ends up meeting this woman named Morgan, who's dealing with the loss of her son on that very same day. And then this story is kind of about how she starts to become obsessed with this woman named Morgan, and she starts to like really try to, you know, insert herself into this woman's life. And this book is definitely more of a character study because you're kind of like watching and following along as this woman Katie is just kind of like spiraling, you know, through the grief of like losing her sister, but then also becoming really obsessed with this other woman. This book was just so fascinating, and I was constantly questioning like while I was reading it, like, oh my gosh, like how dark is this gonna get, or like how unhinged are we going to get? And I just thought it was really satisfying and really well written. It really kept me engaged the entire time. And then I also gave 4 stars to Baby X. This one is a sci-fi thriller that I'm so glad that I enjoyed this one because the premise is just so cool. Because this one's taking place in like a very near future where basically like people can take your DNA and create a baby with it. Any 2 people in the country can create a baby. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, and all they need is your DNA. So basically what's happening is that people are meeting children that they never even conceived. And in this story, it's really interesting because we're following this guy named Trace, who's a famous singer, and he's really worried about like his DNA getting like leaked into the world. And so he hires this woman to be his biosecurity guard, and her job is to ensure his biological safety. And then in the synopsis, it talks about how she and Thorne are confronted by a pregnant woman named Quinn who claims that Thorne is the father of her baby. And that is only the beginning of this book. This one is so wild. And on the synopsis, it does say perfect for fans of Blake Crouch and John Mars, and like I could not agree more. That is definitely the kind of vibes that this book has. I think the only reason this wasn't a 5-star for me is because I did find one of the big twists in this book to be pretty predictable, but like otherwise, this was such a fun thriller. And then another 4-star book that I had is How to Kill a Guy in 10 Dates. This one is actually described as being a slasher and a rom-com. And in this story, we're following this character named Jamie, who is a really big cinephile. And one night she goes to this event in New York City with one of her best friends, where it's kind of like a speed dating event where you get 10 minutes with each guy. And then while she's at this event, all the power gets cut out, and when the lights come back on, her date has his neck cut. And this book really is the perfect balance of slasher and rom-com because the romance in this book is actually so good. She really hits it off with these 2 different guys when she's at this speed dating event. And I thought the guy Wes was so sweet with her. Like, oh my gosh, like any of the scenes that they had together in this book, I was actually dying. Like they were so freaking cute. And I was just so impressed by how this author was able to perfectly balance the vibes of like a slasher and a romance at the same time. I also just loved all of the attention to detail in this book. Like it was so cute. And I will have the live show for the Literally Dead book club linked down below because I was recently asked to be a co-host for this one, and I did a whole live show discussion about this book recently, so I'll have that link down below if you missed that. And then I also ended up giving 4 stars to this nonfiction called Why I Love Horror. Oh my gosh, this one was so good. I ended up listening to this one on audio, and if you're a fan of horror books or anything horror related, I would highly recommend reading this one because this book is actually a collection of essays from some of the biggest horror authors that are writing right now, including some of my personal favorites like Josh Mallerman, Jennifer McMahon, Tananarive Due, Paul Tremblay, Rachel Harrison, and Grady Hendrix, just to name a few. And I think this is such a well put together collection of essays because I loved that at the start of each essay, you would get an introduction from the editor of this book that would talk about why they love this author, what their best book is, and then it would also compare like if you enjoyed this author, here's a list of other authors that you could check out that have similar vibes. It was just so cool and so helpful. There were some essays that I thought were a lot better than others. Like there were definitely some that almost made me cry, that got like really personal into like why these authors love horror. But I think by far my favorite in this entire collection had to be the Grady Hendrix essay. Like, dude, are you kidding me? His essay was so good. Like 5 stars just for his essay alone. But wow, I truly think if you enjoy anything horror related, you're gonna love this. Alright, and then moving right along to my new favorites, these are the best books that I've read so far this year, starting with The Correspondent. This is a book that I gave 4.5 stars. This is a literary fiction novel that I ended up reading because it was one of BookTube's best books of 2025. And in this story, we're following this character who's an elderly woman, and it's really interesting because the story is told in a very unconventional way because it's entirely told through letters that she's writing. And some of these letters are letters that she's never sent. And this book was such a heavy but like beautiful book, and I highly recommend the audiobook, by the way, because not only is the audiobook really good because it's a full cast audiobook, but also because of the way that this narrator delivers some of these lines. Oh my gosh, like you can hear her like getting choked up on the audiobook, and it was just so beautiful and like so hard hitting. And I feel like I love this book so much because this character just felt so real to me, and the way that this book talked about grief and like all of these different things that we go through in life, it was just so beautifully done. The writing in this book was just so beautiful, and this was actually the first book that I read after my uncle passed away in January, and I feel like this book just like came into my life at the perfect time. Like it was just what I really needed to read at the moment. And so I loved The Correspondent. I would highly recommend. And then I also ended up giving 4.5 stars to Daddy Issues by Kate Goldbeck. And this was a complete surprise because the other book that I read from this author, I had DNF'd it and I wasn't sure if this author's writing was for me, but there was something about this. I loved it so much. I love that we're following this 26-year-old woman named Sam, and she's kind of feeling very directionless in her life. You know, like she's still living with her mom at her mom's apartment. And then this is a story about her romance with this guy who's a single father who's like living next door. But what I found to be so refreshing about this girl Sam is that she constantly talks about how she like doesn't really like children, and she's so uncomfortable around children most of the time. And I really related to that because I'm not a big kids person myself. Like I've never wanted kids, and I always kind of get uncomfortable around kids. And so I found her to be so relatable in this book and just so funny. And like Sam's character, like yes, at times she could be kind of an asshole, but I also thought that she was just so real and like so honest, and there was something so refreshing about her character. And I also just really loved the romance between her and this guy who's a single father. I just thought they actually had really cute chemistry, and I love the way the romance was written in a way that felt very real to me. Another book that I gave 4.5 stars is This Story Might Save Your Life. This feels like one of those books that was like written just for me because it feels like it's the perfect balance of like a thriller and a romance at the same time. Like the author actually said that this is perfect for fans of Lisa Jewell and Emily Henry, and like I could not agree more. And what I really loved about this book is that we're following these two best friends named Benny and Joy. They decide to start this comedy survival podcast together that's called This Story Might Save Your Life. And these two, Benny and Joy, they've been best friends for years, like for over a decade. But what I really love about this book is that in the flashback chapters, you're getting Joy's perspective and kind of like reading about how they became friends in the first place, and her chapters definitely feel like more of a romance. And then in the present day timeline, you're reading from Benny's perspective when he shows up at Joy's house to film the next episode of their podcast, and Joy has gone missing. And so his chapters definitely feel like more of a thriller. And I just loved these characters so much. I found this story to be so engaging. This is a book that I tore through in one afternoon. Like I had to finish it. I had to see where it was going. And I just love this so much. I think if you're looking for a book that has the perfect balance of like a thriller and a romance, this is the book for you. And then one of the first books that I gave 5 stars to this month was actually a reread of mine, and that was Fan Service by Rosie Danon. I ended up rereading this book because when I read it last year, I had checked out a book from the library, and so I didn't get the chance to annotate the book in the way that I wanted to. So I was rereading it at the end of January, and I was annotating my copy. Then I found out about this special edition of the book that existed, and I was like, holy shit, like I actually need this special edition. And this one is so beautiful. Like look at this underneath the dust jacket. Holy shit, dude, the amount of detail on this edition of Fan Service. This is my new favorite thing that I own, but I'm so obsessed with this book. And this book is kind of like a paranormal romance. We follow this guy named Devin Ashwood, and he was the lead star on this really popular show called The Arcane Files. And on the show, he played this character who would turn into a werewolf. And now the story's taking place a few years after the show has been off air. And the premise is that he's starting to turn into a werewolf in real life. And so this is a romance between him and this girl named Alex, who is like one of the biggest fans of the show because he's trying to get her help to try and like figure out what the fuck is going on with him. Oh my god, this book was just so good. It was so much fun to reread it, especially because, you know, now that I'm really getting into Supernatural, I can see that this book was so heavily inspired by Supernatural. Like the way that Devin Ashwood is kind of giving Jensen Ackles vibes, like for real. And I just adored the way that the romance is written between these two. to. Like, I love this so much. Like, I loved it even more on a reread. This was an easy 5-star for me, and this is something I can see myself coming back to again and again. I really think you would love this if you were ever a big fan of like a lot of those shows on the CW, like Supernatural or The Vampire Diaries or even like Teen Wolf. And then one of the Amazon Prime short stories that I did give 5 stars to is this one called Valentine's Sleigh by Nevessa Allen. I know that I might get some side eyes because I gave this book 5 stars, but I love this so much. This book is only 90 pages and it's available on Amazon Prime. I just downloaded it to my Kindle and this was so entertaining. Okay, this is from the same author as Lights Out, which I absolutely loved Lights Out. Like, it was so much fun and like so silly stupid. And this book was so entertaining because we're following this guy named Noah and his family like owns this graveyard. And one night when he's in the graveyard, he can hear this woman screaming and he's trying to figure out like where the sound is coming from. And then he realizes it's coming from underground and this woman is like screaming from her coffin. And then the romance just really kicks off from there. And this book was just so silly stupid in the best way. Like, this is everything that I want in a romance novella. It was so fun and it was so ridiculous, but like the romance was actually so good. Like, I was shipping them so hard. And I just love the way that Nevessa Allen writes her romance stories. Like, I don't know, I had such a great time with this. I also gave 5 stars to The Place Where They Buried Your Heart by Christina Henry. And I'm so glad to have a new favorite from Christina Henry because I've read so many books from her lately that have been so disappointing. I think the main reason why I love this book as much as I did is because this is exactly the type of horror that I really love, because we have this really creepy abandoned house at the end of the street and children are going missing and people believe that the house is actually eating children. And I love that this story is taking place in the 90s. I also love the type of storytelling in this book. Like, I love the way that it's written as if this character is like reflecting on this period of her life. And I loved following this character, Jessie. You know, she has a lot of guilt in this book because the opening chapter of this book is actually her daring her younger brother to go into this house. And then her brother ends up disappearing. There's a lot of really great family dynamics explored in this book as well as like a found family thing that I was so here for. And this book was just everything that I wanted. The vibes were so good. I mean, was the ending perfect? No, I don't think the ending of this book was absolutely perfect, but it was a 5-star for me anyway because of the feeling that I had while I was reading this book. Oh my gosh, I just loved it. And then I also gave 5 stars to Is This a Cry for Help by Emily Austen. And I'm so relieved because Emily Austen is just such an incredible writer. And this book in particular was a really good one. It's kind of like a literary fiction book about this woman named Darcy, and she is a librarian working in a library. It had so much commentary about libraries and like how important libraries are to our communities. There was a lot of great commentary in this book about censorship. And I think this is such a great character study book, you know, because we're following Darcy as she's going through some really tough things. You know, now Darcy's married to this woman named Joy, but she's actually grieving the death of this guy, Ben, who has recently passed away, and she used to date him for a long time. And this book touches on a lot of different things, but it really is about this character, Darcy, and like kind of dealing with the grief that she's going through. And it's a lot about her mental health. It's a lot about the library. It's just one of those books that is just so subtle, but like very moving. And I just love the way that Emily Austen writes her books. Like, I feel so immediately connected with her characters and I feel so seen. There was just so much to love about this, and Emily Austen is such a treasure. And then I also found an unexpected 5-star new favorite when I read Kiss Me Maybe by Gabriella Gamez. This is a book that I picked up for a video and I had never even heard of it before. I'll have the video linked down below if you missed it, but I picked it up for that bingo board video, and I only picked it up because the author has the same name as me. But what I didn't know when I picked up this book is that this was going to follow an asexual main character. And if you didn't know, I'm also asexual, and I connected to this character on so many levels because this character is also Mexican and almost all the characters in this book are Mexican. There were just so many things that I had in common with this character that really surprised me, and I felt so seen by this book. And I really think if you are someone who's asexual, you would probably really connect with this character Angela because of all the different things that she says about it. I really talked in depth about this book in the vlog that I did, so if you want to see all of my thoughts where I like read some quotes and I like nearly get emotional talking about this, I will have the vlog linked down below. But this was such a special book, and I also loved that this was a sapphic romance between these two girls. And you know, for having a book that involves an asexual main character, there was actually a lot of smut in this book, and it was written so well in my opinion. I just loved these characters. Like, they felt so real to me. And this character Angela also works in the library. I don't know why I'm reading so many books with characters who work in the library, but I love it so much. Another one of my top favorite books that I've read so far this year has got to be To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. This one is a sci-fi novella, and I truly think this is one of the most perfect novellas I've ever read. I think it's so impressive that Becky Chambers was able to pack so much story into these 130 pages. The way that she made me care about these 4 astronauts, oh my god, it was just incredible. And this is like my favorite type of thing in a sci-fi novel. I love books like this that are kind of more about like the day-to-day lives of these astronauts, and you just kind of get to see them as they're exploring space. And I love the relationships that these astronauts have with each other and like the trust that they have in each other. And there was just something so human about this book that I just really, really loved. Like, the ending of this book book almost had me like bursting into tears. It was truly like one of the best novellas that I've ever read. And then I also ended up giving 5 stars to my book troop pick for this season, My Husband's Wife by Alice Feeney. This book was absolutely incredible. You know, like I was a little bit nervous because I kept hearing from everybody that this was like Alice Feeney's best book yet. And as a huge fan of Alice Feeney, I was like a little bit nervous that maybe it would get overhyped for me. But like, no, it was not overhyped. This book was incredible, an easy 5 stars. In this story, we're following this woman named Eden Fox, and one day she goes on a run in the morning, and when she comes back to her house, the key isn't working in the lock. And she's like, what the heck is going on? And then this other woman answers the door, and she's like, who are you? And the woman's like, oh, I'm Eden Fox. And she's like living there with her husband. And then even her husband comes downstairs and sees her, and he's like, who's that? And she's like, what the fuck do you mean? Like, I'm your wife. Like, I live here. What is going on? And it's almost like she got dropped into some like parallel universe or something where like nobody knows who she is. And that's only the start of this book. Like, this book is absolutely wild. It's unhinged. This book had so many plot twists that my head was spinning. Like, I couldn't even keep track of what was going on. So if you want to hear all of my thoughts for this one, we actually recently just had a live show discussing it. I will have the live show link down below. And I also did make an entire Patreon exclusive reading vlog where I was reading this book and talking about spoilers as I was reading it. So I will also have that link down below if you wanted to see that. But like, wow, dude, Alice Feeney has done it again. And then I think my favorite book that I've read so far this year has got to be Mocha by Monica Kim, which is so exciting to say because I was a really big fan of Monica Kim's debut book when I read it like 2 years ago. And this is her second book and it's her second 5-star from me. So like Monica Kim truly is like that bitch. Like she's becoming like one of my top favorite authors. And in this story, we're following this woman who is working and living in South Korea, and she gets involved with this man who is like really rich, and she's kind of getting caught up in that world. And then at the same time, we're also reading from another perspective of this other guy who works in her same office building. And this guy is like a total creeper, and he's been setting up these cameras in the women's restroom so that he can watch women when they're in the restroom. And that's actually what the term mocha means in South Korea, because this is actually a huge problem in South Korea. There's tons of creepy men that are setting up these cameras in public spaces where women are being watched. And I loved this book for so many reasons, but like truly, Monica Kim is just such a great writer. I was so hooked into this story from the very beginning and I could not put it down. And this has got to be one of the best like female rage, good for her type of stories that I've read in a long time. Like I was like screaming. By the end of this book, like I had such an adrenaline rush and I was just like, oh my god, like she really went there. And this has got to be one of the most satisfying horror books that I've read in such a long time. And this one is actually one that I had on my Kindle as an ARC, and it's going to be publishing in April. So definitely keep an eye out for this book when it publishes, because I loved it so much and I know that I have to get a physical copy for myself because it's my favorite thing that I've read so far this year. All right, so those are all of the books. Those are all the 42 books that I've read so far this year. If you missed any of the reading vlogs where I talk about these books in greater detail, I will have all the reading vlogs that I've worked on in the last 2 months linked down below. But I also thought I would show you, here's a glance of all of the books that I read in January with all the ratings, and then here's a glance at all of the books that I read in February with all of their ratings if you just wanted like a quick, you know, like screenshot moment. But yeah, it's been a really great reading year so far and I cannot complain. I've already found so many new 5-star favorites. You'll have to let me know, how is your reading year going so far? Have you found any new 5-star favorites, and if so, what are they? And also, if you've read any of the books that I talked about in this video, please do let me know your thoughts on them. And I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!